Hello, Justin Boyd, Liberty University, History 797. I'm going to do my video defense on the Gilded Age of yellow journalism. At the turn of the 20th century, newspapers weren't just reporting the news, they were shaping it. William Randolph Hearst and Joseph Pulitzer turned headlines into engines of emotion, and their papers influenced how Americans understood foreign crisis, like the Cuban conflict that led to the Spanish-American War. Studying yellow journalism is important because it shows that newspapers were not just passive recorders of events. They actively shaped public opinion. In the 1890s, sensational headlines, graphic illustrations, and moral framing helped the public interpret complex foreign crises, like the Cuban conflict, in ways that influenced political debate and even legislative action. Understanding this helps us trace the roots of modern media influence in the ways emotion and spectacle can affect democratic participation. Research questions. My paper asks, how did yellow journalism shape public sentiment and influence political behavior in the Gilded Age? So, with this, I argue that yellow journalism, far from being mere sensationalism, functioned as structured mechanisms that amplified the information, emotions, and civic attention, both reflecting and shaping public opinion and political outcomes. So the methodology of it, my research used a mixed method approach, both content and the impact of yellow journalism. I began with thematic content coding, carefully analyzing front page articles to identify recurring rhetorical frames, such as atrocity, outrage, and victimhood, which structured how readers interpret events. Next, I conducted visual analysis of illustrations and halftone photographs to see how the images reinforced these emotional, moral narratives. To quantify the emotional force of the newspapers, I applied automated sentiment analysis, tracking peaks of outrage or sympathy over time, particularly around key events like the USS Maine explosion. Finally, I linked these media patterns to real-world outcomes by examining spatial and electoral correlations, showing how newspaper exposure affected voting behavior, legislative debates, and public engagement in a measurable way. My findings were that yellow journalism played a dual role in shaping public opinion and political behavior. On the one hand, newspapers reflected existing anxieties about empire, humanitarian duty, national honor, capturing the fears and concerns of the American public opinion. On the other hand, they had a catalytic effect. Sensational headlines, dramatic illustrations, and atrocity narratives, such as coverage of Weyler's Cuban reconcentration campaign in 1896, or the USS Maine explosion in 1898, amplified emotional responses, lowering the threshold for outrage and making interventionist rhetoric more politically viable. These stories were not confined to the readers alone. They were cited in congressional debates and public addresses, like Edwin Ewell May's 1898 speech, showing that yellow journalism structured civic attention and shaped political debate, rather than merely providing spectacle. The study complicates the notion that newspapers were merely sensational. It shows that we're institutional actors that help structure political perception, demonstrating that media influence on public opinion is both measurable and historically consequential. So in closing, yellow journalism reminds us that news is never neutral. Its power lies not in fleeting spectacle, but in the ways it shapes people, the way they think, feel, and act, then and now. Thank you.